Okay, hello everyone. My name's Clay Wirestone. I'm the Director of Communications here at Kansas Action for Children. I am joined today by Emily Fetsch, our Director of Policy and Research. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
We're just going to get some housekeeping matters out of the way here as we start up. One of those is that in true KAC conversation form, the last couple of times we've done this, we've had some sort of technical glitches. Today, no glitches so far. However, the internet in my neighborhood is down, so we are connecting to you via my iPhone's hotspot capacity. So hopefully that will be okay. If the signal drops and we have to come back, that is why. I also wanted to let you all know about a new resource that's available on the KAC website for folks who might be interested. If you go to kac.org, there is now a tab at the top of the website for COVID-19 resources. If you go there, we've put together a page that includes some basic national resources, some state resources, and then collects all in one place the various pieces of content that we've put out over the last month or so. And now let's turn to the main subject today, which is talking about state revenue, talking about the money coming into the state and what that means for the future of the state's kids and families. A lot of times folks ask, what does KAC, a kids organization, why are you working on budget and tax issues? And for us, I think the answer is really that the amount of money that the state has coming in and how it spends that money is really foundational for all of the issues that we work on. For kids' health, programs like Medicaid and CHIP really depend on full and proper funding. For childcare, the ability to support parents trying to find high quality early education opportunities for their kids. State spending and national spending plays a big role in that. And then when you come to family economic supports, things like SNAP that help families put food on the table, or TANF, which helps families meet their basic needs. All of these really need state support. All of these need adequate resources and adequate revenue. And so with that as kind of an introduction, we'll turn to Emily and kind of the topic du jour, which is a report that came out last week, from the State Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. I believe that's the name, right?
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about the CRE, Emily. What is it?
So the CRE, or the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, is comprised of lots of different folks from the State House and other places, including the budget director, staff from the Division of Budget, the director and staff from the Legislative Research Group, and also staff from the Kansas Department of Transportation, as well as economists from state universities. And they meet twice a year in November and April. So they met on April 20th this year. And they meet to try and project what the state general fund again is kind of the main piggy bank of the state, and to project the state general fund revenues for the next 2 years. And those projections are really important because they are used to kind of provide the parameters, if you will, of what the budget can be. I'll probably mention this a couple times throughout our conversation, but the state governments, unlike the federal government, can't deficit spend. So they can't end the fiscal year with a negative balance. They can only spend the money that's coming in to the state. And so when the CRE met on April 20th, it was kind of, it's unusual for a lot of reasons. We're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that's led to a lot of economic ramifications that they weren't really anticipating, that none of us were really anticipating, and that had to be taken into account and really changed what the revenue projections looked like for the next 2 years. And then the other thing related to COVID-19 was that normally the Consensus Revenue Group meets right after tax day, right? So tax day is generally April 15th. They meet a couple days later. And so most of the revenue that's going to come into the state in the fiscal year, which ends July 1, has been brought in. And so it's a more reliable estimate from what they think is coming in. Because of COVID-19, the Kansas state government, along with the federal government, pushed back tax day from April 15th to July 15th. So all of the money that they usually see come in already hasn't come in. And some of the money that will come in will now be part of fiscal year 2021 because of that window between that July 1st start of the fiscal year and July 15th.
But what did the group actually end up finding? What did it end up deciding was the revenue picture for this year and next?
Yeah, so the big story, I mean, it's not news that the CRE meets in April. The big story is that because of the economic downturn that's caused in part by COVID-19, there was significant decreased revenue. And I think that most people kind of in this universe were anticipating that there was going to be some impact, obviously, from COVID-19 on the revenue, but it was really a drop that I think most people maybe did not anticipate. It was more than $1.27 billion in decreased revenue in the next 2 years. The main sources of revenue that really took a hit are the two largest sources of revenue, which is income tax and sales tax. And both of those taxes were revised significantly. So individual taxes were revised to bring in less than $620 million than anticipated during the November CRE estimates. And this makes sense given what we know about kind of the recent massive increases in unemployment and lost jobs. So if employers are laying off workers, reducing hours, workers are earning less income and then will pay less income in their taxes. The other kind of major component of that reduction was sales taxes, which were revised to bring in less than $95 million than anticipated during the November CRE. And again, this isn't unusual with economic downturns. Sales tax is often the first revenue source that we see decline because individuals are cutting spending. And of course now, during this particular economic downturn, businesses are literally shuttered due to these health concerns. And so the impact might even be more pronounced than we might normally see in kind of your average economic downturn.
Yeah, I mean, and it's difficult to overstate kind of the degree of change that we have in looking at this new CRE number. I mean, we were projected to end with, positive balances for at least the next handful of years. And at this point now, we go from there's still a positive balance at the end of this fiscal year, but then next fiscal year is very challenging.
Yes, that's right. So with the new estimates, the new ending balance for fiscal year 2020, which again ends July 1st, is $205 million. Before the revision, we thought we would have a really strong ending balance of almost $900 million. And so that was, significantly curtailed. The big problem is that for fiscal year 2021, there's now a projected $653 million budget shortfall. And again, as I mentioned kind of at the top, the federal government, unlike the federal government, state governments can't deficit spend. And so we cannot kind of maintain what that looks like. We either need to see increased revenue coming into the state, or we're going to have to make some really painful cuts to the budget.
So Emily, let's just get some perspective here then. How is the revenue that we're looking at here, nearly $1.3 billion less in revenue than expected for Kansas? How does that compare to some of the downturns that we've seen before?
Yeah, so Kansas, like the rest of the country, has seen economic downturns. So in the kind of most recent future, in the past 20 years, we saw a pretty big economic downturn, both nationally as well as in Kansas, after the 9/11 attacks, which saw an increase in employment as some industries suffered from those attacks. During the Great Recession, which began in 2008, we saw the national unemployment rate peak at 9.6% in 2010. In Kansas, the state saw the unemployment peak at 7.5% in the summer of 2019. And again, during the Great Recession, we also saw a drop in revenue. We also had kind of our own economic disaster in Kansas during the Brownback years with his tax experiment, where we saw decreased revenue by more than $700 million the first year that that tax experiment was enacted. And so while we have seen economic downturns, we haven't really seen one like this. During the Great Recession, we saw unemployment and we saw decreased revenue, but it wasn't all at once. Businesses kind of held on as long as they could, and it was really spanned out over a period of time. This rapid drop in unemployment and business shuttering, this is really unique, and it's not something that we've really seen before in the least the recently in particular, and maybe not really ever see something kind of at this scale. And so it's anticipated that the economic fallout could be worse than the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, states had to make a lot of really hard choices with the decrease in revenue. Lawmakers had to, lay off state workers and cut spending in needed programs. And even now, some program spending for states hasn't even recovered from the Great Recession. And here we are again with another economic downturn.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the kind of the real cruel difficulty that Kansas finds itself in right now, is that we had just 3 years ago finally undone the worst parts of the Brownback tax experiment. We were beginning to get sufficient revenues to actually make investments we needed to make, restore some of the cuts that that the state had gone through, and now we're facing another, giant challenge. One of the things I also want to highlight here, as we've talked again about the connection between kind of the federal government response and the state response, in the Great Recession, we did have federal funds coming to the state to help us make our own books balance and our own ends meet. But that hasn't quite happened in the same way this time, right?
Yes. So while I was kind of making comparisons to the Great Recession, which again is kind of the most recent major hit that we saw that impacted both states and the federal government, there are some really big differences. And one that I mentioned before is that this hit us all at once. There wasn't a delayed kind of impact. It's really a boom as businesses across the nation are shut down and across the state. Another big difference is kind of what federal assistance looks like. So during the Great Recession, the federal funds allowed state governments to use federal funds to backfill the lost revenue. So that decrease that I was talking about earlier, during kind of a similar situation during the Great Recession, states were able to use those federal funds to backfill that. Due to the limitations that are being placed on the federal funds this time around, states don't have that opportunity. The funds are marked in a much more specific way for COVID-19 response. So while Kansas is going to receive $1.25 billion as a state, they aren't able to use that for that $1.27 billion decline in revenue. And that $1.25 billion sounds like an awful lot, but it is less than what the state got during the Great Recession, and it's really billions less than what we need to make up for the lost tax revenue and for the economic crisis and the kind of long-term impacts that COVID-19 is going to pose.
Well, I think, when all of this has happened so quickly that it is sometimes easy to lose sight of how dramatic this is. And we've used words like this, dramatic and unprecedented, I feel like a lot during this conversation, but we're looking at potentially a situation where 1 out of every 7 adults is not employed right now. I mean, those are Great Depression levels of unemployment. Now, hopefully those are not necessarily long-lasting, enduring levels of unemployment, but it's incredibly challenging for everyone along the line. So with all of this being said, with all of this context being set, what's kind of the next step? What should lawmakers be doing? What should they be thinking about right now? Oh.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, what we're seeing in Kansas right now, you alluded to this earlier, that we were just beginning to kind of be able to make these really important investments, and now is not the time to stop. Previously, we were constrained during the Great Recession, and unlike a lot of other states, we didn't use that interim time between the Great Recession and now to be strengthening on our budgets. Instead, our state went through kind of a self-imposed second recession during the Brownback years, which really left us really vulnerable to something like this. And so what we know is that now is the time to continue to invest in our state. Now is not the time to make harsh cuts to vital programs that we know provide assistance to individuals, particularly individuals that are being impacted by COVID-19, low-income families, working families. Direct assistance, we learned again during the Great Recession, direct assistance to families is what really helps to restart the economy. It's not big corporate bailouts for multinational corporations. The state did a good first step. They passed the Senate Bill 66, which was the budget bill before they left in March, and they appropriated $65 million to COVID funding, which they'll need to spend down before they spend down the federal funds of $1.25 billion. But I think the two things the lawmakers need to do is, one, really prioritize what's important, and what's important is investing in Kansas families, not making big cuts to needed programs. Number two, I think state policymakers really need to make clear to the Kansas federal delegation that more federal investment is needed at this critical time, and more flexible federal investment, things that can help plug the revenue shortfall that we're seeing right now. And then third, I think that policymakers need to be prepared to make kind of difficult decisions that help ensure that the state continues to bring in this revenue needed to address this current crisis.
Yeah, and I think here at KAC, as we go forward, these are some of our core missions in terms of what we do here. Is we track state legislation, how state leaders react. We track federal legislation and how federal leaders react. And in the weeks and months to come, we will likely be in touch with all of you about ways that you can support us and support Kansas families and kids, most importantly, in making sure that they have the vital services they need. And also then making sure that our federal delegation and the federal folks understand how very important it is that they take some of that revenue that they are spending, rightfully so, to help cushion the nation from the worst effects of this pandemic, and make sure that it comes back to the states, because 60% of Kansas's budget goes to education. It goes to school. That's funding that we have been battling in court over for years. And we know that that's money that we're going to have to spend. Like that, it's a requirement. It's a court agreed requirement that we're spending that money. So that means it's a 40% part of the budget, less than half, that you could theoretically go in there and reduce. And those are going to be the kinds of choices that really no one should be forced to make in a time like this, and that no one should really have to endure, especially if we're talking about the kids and families in need, and kids and families who might not have been, quote unquote, in need before this this pandemic, but now are. So there's a lot to do, and I fully intend that here at KAC we will have a lot of opportunities for folks to make their voices heard as we go ahead. So Emily, anything else? So let's talk practically here now. kind of what are the immediate next steps at the state level?
Well, I think the major thing that we're kind of in a holding pattern to wait and see is the legislature going to return to Topeka this year. There have been kind of suggestions either way, whether or not they're going to return. There was some discussion last week that the Senate and House budget committees met to kind of review what they still had left and what things they thought that they would maybe tackle after the recess. But depending on if they come back to finish the session or not, or if they wait and start again next January, it really determines kind of what the policy options are. If the legislature doesn't come back to Topeka this spring, what it will look like is that the governor will be able to accept the federal monies that is coming in and allocate them. If the ending balance of that fiscal year 2021 budget starts to look like it's crossing that kind of zero threshold, then the governor would be able to make allotments to help make sure that we have a positive ending balance. If the legislature comes back this spring, then they can make some adjustments that might change kind of what those roles look like for the executive and legislative branch, but we won't know what that looks like until we determine whether or not the legislature is coming back this year.
Well, there will be a lot to keep track of and a lot to watch. Emily, I really thank you for coming here virtually, that is, because I also am obviously in this totally real and not at all imaginary chrome and lime green office behind me. But I just wanted to ask, was there anything else that you thought we should mention or cover that we might not have hit so far today? I apologize to those following us on Facebook. I know we have been kind of in and out. I don't see any questions posted at present, but Emily, any other thoughts?
I think that the last thing I would leave you with is, as we're thinking about the budget, this really is every policy is budget policy. And if you care about the COVID-19 response, if you care about education and the new virtual education homeschooling world that we're living in, if you care about the over 100,000 kids in poverty in Kansas, which is probably unfortunately increasing right now, all of our responses to those issues really at the end of the day is dependent on the strength of our budget. And if we want to make sure that Kansas kids and families are doing well right now and moving forward, we need to make sure that we have the budget to support that.
Hear, hear. And not just a budget to support it, but ways to get the money into that budget to make it a reality. Mm-hmm. And again, as I had said earlier, I think for a lot of us here who had worked on budget policy and tax and budget issues for a while, this is an unexpected addition to the challenges, but I think it just underscores for us how important this is and how important it is to get it right. Mm-hmm. So Emily, thank you so very much. I would just ask that if anyone has any questions or wants to know any more about this topic, please get in touch with us, or our organizational email is kac@kac.org. So you can reach us there anytime. Please drop by our website at kac.org and take a look at our COVID-19 resources. And we look forward to connecting with all of you again soon.